Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of our program. We're going to give participants about two more minutes to join, and then our program will begin. Thank you so much for waiting. Good morning, Mr. Tomas. Can you hear me?
I can. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Or good evening for afternoon for all of you in Italy.
Do you
Mr.
mind
Tomas, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, hi. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining.
Good morning.
Allow me to introduce you and begin the program, and then we'll give you the floor.
Great. Thank
Good
you.
morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining day 4 of our program. We have our first speaker for the day. We have Mr. Thomas Sowinski. He is a customer and business-focused digital transformational leader, technologist, and a keynote speaker. Thomas is a web industry veteran focused on building custom-centric applications to satisfy the ever-changing user expectation, leveraging big data and analytics to help drive decisions while embracing agile development practices to reduce cycle time. His focus has been on shortening the feedback loop to deliver viable software the customer expects. With extensive background in the banking, finance, and insurance industries, he has also worked with brands such as Comcast, Xfinity, Echo Shoes, Post Membrane, and National Financial. Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas, for joining. You have the floor.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here. I prepared a few slides. Want to talk through a little bit of what we've done. You just find the right PowerPoint here. I'll share my desktop and it'll be easier for. Oh, I apologize. Apple made an update to my Mac here, and I need to re-allow Zoom to share my screen. Give me 1 second.
No worries. Thank you.
I may have to quit and reopen Zoom. I will be right back. Apologies here. All right, I am back. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Perfect. Apologies on that.
No worries.
I tested it yesterday, so.
Yeah, thank you participants for waiting while we get ready.
All right. Okay, so as I was mentioning before I dropped off, I've prepared a few slides. I kind of want to take everyone through the journey that we were on, really starting just about a year ago, as the COVID-19 pandemic was really starting to affect everyone globally, and shortly before, at the time, then President Trump canceled all incoming flights to the U.S., which is coming up almost on a year now. We really started thinking about, how do we rethink how we work and engage from a very, very traditional model. So where we started 1 year ago, we were a company that was largely tied to physical locations. We were heavily on desktops, few on laptops. And so most of our people that had laptops were managers or people that did travel between our offices. The other expectation was that people would be in the office working, and so they would all be using a desktop machine. We were very favored in in-person meetings over remote meetings. We did have connections between conference rooms and the different offices, but for the most part, everything was always an in-person meeting. And then we were also using a mixture of collaboration software. At the time, our IT teams, we were all piloting Microsoft Teams. We were also using Slack in conjunction with our marketing team. And then Cisco Jabber was used by the rest of the company. We were also on a mixture of virtual meeting software. Again, we were using MS Teams as a pilot with the IT teams, Slack with our marketing teams. We were using WebEx for a lot of external meetings we were having with people, and then Zoom as well. Zoom was becoming very, very popular, especially in the corporate world at that time. We also had different virtual connections. We had a traditional VPN that we managed. It went into our data center. We also had a new cloud-based VPN. We knew that the traditional VPN could not handle a lot of people going remotely. And so even before the COVID pandemic, we had plans to start moving to a cloud-based VPN technology so that we could have more bandwidth in terms of the number of people we could connect being remote. And then we also had a Citrix environment. So we had a lot of applications that we put in Citrix so that people could remotely access these via remote terminals, or even if they needed to, they could use a personal machine or a personal device. They use Citrix. And then we were very heavy on-premise architecture. We had just started our cloud journey. And so everything was heavy on premise. So in order to get access to anything, you needed to connect, whether it was through the VPN or through Citrix. At the time, our Exchange email was in 2 different environments. We had the majority of the company still on premise on a very old, aging Exchange 2012 environment. It was end of life, and our IT teams had been piloting. We had just cut the entire IT staff over to Office 365, which is why we were using MS Teams. And so we were using the O365 environment fully, probably since the beginning of February when we cut everyone over. So we were still in this very, very mix of email environments. So on O365 and on premise. And then our phone system was only enabled in our offices. We use a Cisco phone system that's tied to Jabber. It tied you to the physical desk. You had a physical phone at your desk. We did not have any virtual phone systems. And so this was kind of the environment that we were in. It was a very traditional working culture. We were, as I mentioned before, heavy over on the physical in-person meetings versus virtual meetings. and we were large. It was a large management-led culture, and so it was a lot of management. Especially top-down management, keeping track of their employees, who was in the office, who was not in the office, and managing people very much on hours worked and output. And so everyone was in the office, and we had very limited working from home enabled. We had just started to allow people to work from home only one day a week from Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Working from home was seen as potentially you taking a day off, although you say you're working from home. And so we didn't want people taking long weekends by using a Thursday or a Friday as their day off. And so the midday week was what we had. So this was our working culture. And we also had a very small offshore footprint. So that at the time, we were not really looking at leveraging our vendors in India. We used them onshore, but even though they had a presence in India, we did not take advantage of it. We started that very small. And so we didn't really have an offshoring footprint. So this is where we started a year ago. And so I'll start taking you through some of the things that we have done to change. And largely, most of this has been driven by the COVID-19 pandemic. So in terms of our remote working capabilities, this time last year, I worked with my COO to start requisitioning laptops for everybody. We could see what other countries were doing, and we had a feeling it was only a matter of time before the US adopted a similar policy. And we didn't know how long we were going to be working remotely, but we knew there was going to be a period of time as we combated the virus that we would. And so we were a company of about 1,000 people. Roughly 30 to 40% had laptops at the time. And so we requisitioned 600 laptops in 2 waves. So we had a first wave of 300 and a second wave of 300. And we staggered that to just give us time to handle 300 laptops, but also at the time, so many people were procuring laptops. There was a delay in procuring the second round of 300. But we built and distributed these within 6 weeks. A big kudos to our desktop support environment for being able to take these laptops, get them built, get them configured, and get them shipped out to employees. And we prioritized who needed them first. We took a look at who had existing connectivity through Citrix that they were able to continue working, and then who needed to have the laptops distributed, especially when we were taking a look at a lot of our call center employees who were very heavy tied to desktops because they worked in the office physically. Now we had to move all of them to a remote location. So it was a very very good response by the team to get these built and distributed. We also increased the cloud VPN bandwidth. So we were in the process of already building that out. We actually had to refocus a little bit and purchase a larger amount. We were going to 100% remote workforce. For a company where working from home was, the rare occasion, our bandwidth was just enough to handle that. Going to 100% remote required us to have a lot bigger connectivity to our data center, and so that was a key in the initial month to get that accelerated and set up. We also provided a stipend for all of our employees for internet access. We knew everybody had some level of internet, but in order for us to do the work that we needed to do, we knew that our employees needed to have higher levels of access. And so for them to be able to work effectively, we provided a stipend in their paycheck every 2 weeks so that they could purchase higher broadband speeds through their internet service providers. And then we also reimbursed for approved working from home needs. Certainly when a lot of people went remotely, they didn't have their office or an office area in their house set up. A lot of people were working at kitchen countertops, kitchen tables. Some were in their bedrooms, laying on their bed because it was the only quiet spot they could have. So we reimbursed for things such as desks, chairs, webcams, monitors, headsets, etc. Everything that you take for granted today, but we wanted to make sure that our employees had proper environments, especially as we realized that we were going to be in this, working from home, sheltering in place environment for much longer than, the initial, few months we thought it would be. And then we also shipped all the desk phones to call center employees to route our calls to. So with the ability of the cloud-based VPN, we were able to connect all of the physical desk phones to through the VPN back to our phone system. So now in the early weeks where our call center employees were making calls from their personal devices or mobile phones, now we were able to send them their desk phones, and we were able to use our phone system almost to the full extent that it has today. There is some limitations with the VPN, but it gave us a significant capability remotely that we hadn't had prior. And we're looking at things like virtual phone systems now to replace our current Cisco environment. And then we consolidated to a single unified collaboration platform. Right. And so if you remember on the first slide, we were all over the place in terms of different technologies. We were using different technologies. We were piloting. As we accelerated our move to Microsoft Teams, we consolidated onto that as a single platform. So everything that we do now from a collaboration standpoint is all within that environment. And then from a culture and work process, more frequent touch points. What we found is where our company, so all the employees were not in the office, we needed to keep in touch with them a little bit more. So we introduced more touch points, and it was also part of our journey to becoming more agile, right? And not just doing agile, but actually being agile. And there's a difference in doing the process of agile, whether it's Scrum or Kanban or any of the frameworks, but being agile is sometimes more important. So for this, daily stand-up meetings became critical. And so a lot of our teams moved to a very quick, 10 to 15 meeting in the morning to talk about what they were planning on doing for the day, and making sure that they were all in alignment with the work that they had in front of them. We went to weekly team, staff, and leadership meetings so that from the top down to all the employees, we had the ability to make sure we were staying connected and also being able to share the right information at the right time, making sure it was getting disseminated out to the employees and staff that needed it. Weekly one-on-one meetings became even more critical. Some teams were doing monthly, some teams were doing bi-weekly, but shifting to a weekly one-on-one to have that direct contact with your employees was important. And it was not just with the direct employees, it was also making sure you were having more frequent contact with your peers. So my one-on-ones increased with all of my business partners. And I wanted to understand how they were doing, not just in terms of from a business perspective, but from dealing with COVID. What did we have to do from a technology standpoint to support and continue to help them? And then skip levels became also important as well. You don't have that face-to-face time. Senior leaders were not able to, go out and walk the floor and bump in and see people anymore and, ask how they were doing. So the skip level meetings really became important to allow the more senior staff to still have a connectivity back into some of the regular staff. And so very highly supportive of doing skip levels. And then, as I mentioned, we were in the process of going to a more agile environment, especially from a software delivery perspective. Our 2-week sprint reviews became more important. What you saw was as COVID really forced us to be working remotely longer, the 2-week sprint reviews became very critical for the business. And so you started seeing much more business attendance in these meetings. And so it really became a good collaborative partnership between the technology side and the business side in understanding what our customer needs were and how we had to adjust and pivot. And there were things that just because of dealing with the impact that COVID had on our customers, we needed to make a lot of quick changes, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. the program increment meeting also became crucial. So we do from the SAFE framework, we do a program increment every 13 weeks. And so we operate on 6 2-week sprints plus an innovation and planning sprint. And the PI planning, it's 2 3/4 days. It used to be 2 days in person. We tried to get it down to 1, but 1 day was just too long. And so we do 2 3/4 days. That we shifted all virtual. And so we use Miro. We just had one last week. We use Miro as our tool to put up a virtual program board so that each team can start planning out their work and connect it to all the different other teams in terms of dependencies. And it gave one spot that you could go in and virtually see everything that was going on, all the work that was planned, the dependencies between it. And it really helped us as a team manage what it is we were going to be delivering and the value we were going to be delivering to our customers over the next PI. And so this became an even bigger and more crucial meeting between IT and the business. And then we increased our Ask Me Anything. So AMA meetings were very critical with so much stuff going on.
Thomas, a quick question for you, right? So
Yes.
that's all sort of focusing on the internal integrations and how it goes into this. But what about your customers, right? Especially in the insurance business, where your customer interaction, where all those things have become really important. You know, people can not longer walk in. That I would assume the pipes of information getting into the system from the outside to your organization from the outside changed as well. So what are some of the best practices of how do you engage with sort of both the revenue generating side, but also from the support generating side with your traditional customers?
So one of the things that it required us to do was get a much tighter feedback loop with the customer and understanding the customer needs. You know, we are a workers' compensation and insurance carrier. And so because of the pandemic, a lot of our customers were significantly impacted and had to furlough or lay off many of their workforce. So even though we were renewing or writing the same number of policies, the premium on those policies was significantly down. And so, you know, we certainly were seeing that in, you know, the impact of COVID impact our customers. And so we talked to them, we reached out to them, we provided surveys. We actually have for you know, we're about 50% of our book of business is here in the state of California. We created a very easy COVID tracker for them to track all of their COVID cases. You know, this started off as an MVP with a very simple WordPress website and a spreadsheet for our customers to fill out. And then we, you know, as we got feedback from them on the spreadsheet in the process, we then built a COVID tracking application to make it easier and more seamless for them to make the updates and the changes to COVID as they were being affected. And so through the outreach that we did, and a lot of it, you know, is a big kudos to our marketing department who manages the relationships with our agents and brokers. They're independent, but our primary distribution channel. They would get a lot of feedback from our end customers as well. And our customers we define as in 4 ways. We have the injured worker, you know, who we want to provide compassionate care to. And we have our agents and brokers who are our primary distribution channel. There's the policyholder, and then there's our internal employees. And in all 4 of those groups, it was important for us to understand what their needs were and how they were interacting with us. One of the things that in response to COVID, we knew a lot of our customers, you know, these were service employers. They were restaurant owners. Some of them were large retail chain restaurant owners. We knew that they were going to come back. Just at the time they were renewing their policy, they were shuttered or closed. And so we created an application that allows them to update their premium on a monthly basis. So whereas before we would do a yearly true up of their payroll, we allowed them to update this monthly. And so their premium would adjust monthly and their charges would adjust monthly based off of their payroll. And so as that gave them the flexibility to make payments rather than getting hit with a large payment at the end. It also allowed us to adjust our reserving, and make sure that we had the right reserve set, because as companies have been coming out of the pandemic, we were seeing them renewing at 5 to 10% of previous year's payroll, which is a significant risk that if they hire back up, and as other states in the country opened up, we saw this happen. We could have been in a situation where we were not reserving enough to cover claims that were coming in. And so having that ability to provide flexible payments to our customers was also very critical. And so to me, it's that feedback loop, understanding, getting in touch with your customer, and knowing what it is that they need, but then knowing what they need is one thing. What I challenge my teams to do is deliver more value tomorrow than our customers have today. And so rather than creating long projects, how do we get what the customer needs into their hands quickly? And so this whole culture and work process around being more agile and doing more agile development allowed us to understand the needs of the customer and get it out. So that application, in terms of having the flex pay, that was something that was kind of back of the napkin to initial MVP production in less than 6 weeks. And so we were able to stand up a brand new application in a very short time frame. By no means was it perfect, but it allowed our customers, it gave them a capability that they had not had before. And so these are some of the things that we've done to make sure that we are delivering the value that our customers need, and supporting them, especially during this pandemic, but also making sure that we give them the right products and services that they need to support themselves and their employees through the pandemic and then beyond.
So in that sense, right, I would assume that you have a lot of clients, and probably a lot of them have competing needs. And then once suddenly you move to this remote structure, probably the regular sort of channels of communication are being a little bit, affected by it. So the question becomes is that if in those, with the old ways of things not working and different customers doing different needs, so did you invent some kind of the processes to keep track of those requests? And then how do you actually prioritize them in sort of this chaos that is happening from your customer perspective?
We do. So as I mentioned, our marketing team and our call center teams do a very good job at capturing a lot of customer sentiment, a lot of voice of the customer. And so as that is filtering in,
How do you do that? Do you have some kind of the tool? Do you import it in the CRM? So how do you actually?
So we would do it's a combination of surveys, and so we would provide surveys to the customers. As they would come in and go into our portals. We have a lot of external portals for them. We provided surveys. We also, and so we use things like SurveyMonkey to do the surveys. We also added a lot of tools, especially some of the Google tools, in terms of tracking and understanding, customer engagement with our external sites and our external portals. So we were tracking customer behavior. What are they using? What are they not using? And then, through the surveys, understanding what they're looking to do. We've actually been working on redesigning and updating our customer portals so that they become more impactful and effective for the customer. What we found.
And where do results of those surveys go? Is there some kind of the location? How is that being reviewed from the structure perspective, right? So
correct. So we take all that information, and it's stored in Azure DevOps. So we actually take that information that we get, and we write stories for each of the features of the functionality that the customers are asking for. And so we put this in a backlog that we then work with our business to prioritize. And the backlog is fluid. We use that to manage the work and prioritize, the key features and functionality that we want to roll out. And so we're heavily using Azure DevOps. We're in the process of looking at Salesforce as a CRM. We are heavily dependent upon Excel spreadsheets. And so a lot of what we do is capturing everything in Excel spreadsheets. And then as we moved our intranet site from really just what used to be a web portal to SharePoint, that allowed other teams access. They were able to create Excel online documents and share those. And so Excel became a very, it's still a very powerful tool for us to capture everything. But then a lot of the information that we were capturing also goes into a SQL Server database. And so we will do queries against SQL Server, and we're building out a lot of various reports in Power BI to understand how our customers are using our applications more, and also understand user information, demographic behavior, the types of claims we have coming in. Everything is all stored in some sort of a relational SQL Server database right now, and we used to do extracts, SQL query extracts, and put those into Excel. Now we're building those into Power BI so that we can create custom dashboards for our executives.
So in that sense, right? So if I understood you correctly, so you have your SurveyMonkey and then other survey tools that go into the DevOps, and you kind of go through backlog and all of this. So
Correct.
what about prioritization, right? I would assume that once pandemic happened and then there is so many things happening. So what is your approach to prioritization, and kind of how do you decide what to go forward? So like in terms of the scoring the initiative, but also in terms of the structure, who actually decides what goes next? How do you allocate the budget? How do you actually think from this very, very remote, very hectic perspective? How do you decide what goes in next, and who actually decides that?
So our high level initiatives, they're decided by our senior leadership team, and so we get going into each PI, we get a list of what the top priorities and objectives are for the organization. And based off of those, the individual teams, and this is a combination between our technical product owners on the IT side, as well as our product owners and business leaders on the business side, they work to prioritize what's in that backlog. And so a lot of the prioritization happens at our PI planning events. And then any adjustments that we have to do based off of information that we learn from our customers, we will then adjust and make changes as necessary to the backlog throughout the PI.
And then would you say that it changed during the pandemic, or you kind of was following the same thing? So can you tell us what has changed, and maybe what have the changes?
Going into the pandemic, we were still very much a heavy waterfall project focused organization. And so we would create projects and deliver those projects depending upon size, roughly every 3, 6, 9, maybe 12 months. The pandemic, as we were in the process of doing an agile transformation from a software delivery perspective, and really that was, focusing more on what are the products that we're providing and looking at a product management-led organization versus a defined project-led. And as we started taking a look at those products, we aligned specific teams to them. And the products were all products that were, aligned to businesses already. So we aligned our IT team with our business. And what you saw through the pandemic is the adoption of a product-led methodology more from our business, and thinking on how do we get this functionality, this viable software and this capability out to the customer quicker, and how do we respond to their needs sooner, and supporting them through the pandemic and what they're going through. And so because of the pandemic certainly accelerated a number of things, one of which was in the area of thinking about response to the customer and the business's adoption to be more agile, accelerated with it.
So and then how did you approach sort of the educational point of this, right? So it's a big organization. You have your customer facings, you have your end facing insurance, you have brokers that are doing this. So what were some of the educational parts that you have implemented, and maybe some of the pushback that you have felt from it?
Sure. So we brought in some consultants to help us go through the transformation. They worked with our IT teams as well as some of our key business partners. We also brought in some very strong, newer employees that were very strong agilists that not only knew it but also could train. And so even after the consultants left, we held some training classes, additional training classes with our business peers for some of their additional employees that didn't go through with us initially. And then we also invested heavily in sending people to become certified Scrum Masters or certified product owners through SAFe, and furthering that knowledge and transfer with our existing employee base. And so part of one of the things that we wanted to make sure was that we invested in the employee and making the employees stronger, not just from an IT standpoint, but also from a business and a business capability standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to go through these slides just probably a little quicker, but Vlad, thank you for asking the questions. And really, if anybody else has questions, please, feel free to ask me. I'm not actively looking at the chat, so if there's anything coming up in the chat, I don't see it, Vlad. So if you can, you can help. But
yeah, we have like 40-45 minutes more than we can use, so don't feel rushed.
Perfect. So also in terms of our culture and work process, we improved our suite of metrics to measure productivity. One of the concerns that especially our senior leadership had, coming from a traditional management mindset, was how do we make sure our employees are still being productive being at home? They're not in the office, so I can't see them. So how do I know that they're being productive? And so we had to improve the metrics. So, taking a look at, especially from an IT standpoint, velocity, cycle time, stored points, value was critical, but also within our business units, they were taking a look at metrics in their own right in terms of, how they're closing claims, how we're underwriting the business, how we're keeping in touch with our agents and brokers. Making sure that we understand their needs as well. And so the metrics that we started building and tracking and started putting in Power BI to raise visibility and awareness was also key for us in terms of changing the how we did work. Then use of cameras in meetings. I have an asterisk next to that, and I'll get to that in a second. But using cameras was important to keep that face-to-face with people. The reason there's an asterisk on there is that we're heavily California-based, and for those that aren't aware, California has been one of the most locked down, most restricted states in the U.S. It's also the most populous state, and so as all of our kids were doing the remote learning, especially after the summer going into the fall when they were going back to school, the schools were much better at using Zoom and remote learning capabilities. And so what we found was, even though we were paying for the increased bandwidth with all of the kids using Zoom, so many companies using remote capabilities, the bandwidth from the providers was just stretched to the limit. And so we started turning our cameras off to save on bandwidth so that the audio would continue to remain good. And you could actually tell when kids would come in and out of classes, go to lunch, because you could just see the bandwidth would get worse. So, but mandating the use of cameras was important to keep that face-to-face connectivity. Even though we weren't sitting next to each other, it required us to still be in the presence. And then we also wanted to focus on the employee needs as well as the customer, right? So as I mentioned before, in some of your questions, Vlad, one of our customer segments, the 4 major customer segments, one of those customer segments was the employee. And so we wanted to make sure our employees were set up to make sure that they could handle any customer issues and concerns as effectively as they would if they were in the office. And then what we did was we increased the number of employee satisfaction surveys. So typically we did a yearly one to understand employee, your ESAT. But now what we did is we do it quarterly, and we also do a separate one following each of the PI events to understand how the PI events are going in terms of focusing on our employees. So getting that additional feedback and closing that feedback loop with the employees was important as well.
So maybe a quick question for,
Yes.
can you go back to the previous slide? So just to make sure that everyone understand what those metrics are, right? So we have that you have velocity, cycle time, story points, value. So can you maybe just pick one, the most important one that you saw, and a little bit set a common ground of what it is?
So when we take a look at velocity, this is how long it takes us to close a story. And so when we start taking a look at velocity, it's a very good leading metric in terms of how your teams are doing. And so when we start taking a look at velocity metrics, we can see that we actually are starting to look at a secular pattern, right? We've been doing this for about a year and a half now. And we're able to see cycles, especially around the holiday time. Between Thanksgiving here in the U.S., we have a PI event right after Thanksgiving. We then go into the end of the year holidays. You actually see like a very dip off in productivity because of the amount of time people are doing non-work activities. But then you see a huge spike up, and we're seeing that spike up again. We saw it at the beginning of 2020. We're seeing it now at the beginning of 2021. And so by tracking your team's velocity, you're able to understand how they're doing. And it's sort of like a leading indicator. You can start seeing when velocity is starting to slow down a little, and it allows you to take corrective action if necessary. As we started seeing velocity drop off towards the end of this past year in 2020, we had a feeling it was because of just the cycle we were in. And so we were monitoring it, we were watching it, and what helped us be comfortable is that when we were comparing the graphs, year over year, we were seeing a similar dip. And now what's encouraging to us is that the rate that we're coming out of it, we're actually seeing an increase in the rate of the velocity. So what that's telling us is as our teams are maturing, the more comfortable they're getting with operating in an agile environment, they are getting better. And so we're able to rebound from those periods a lot quicker than before. And so, going through and tracking velocity is a very good indicator for companies to use in terms of team output and productivity.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. And a lot of these metrics, the ones that we've listed here, a lot of these are very common in agile software development. So they come from SAFe, but they're for those that are working in an agile manner. These are all very common metrics to take a look at and measure value, measure productivity in terms of how your teams are doing. So everything was not all rosy. We did have challenges going to work remotely. The days got longer. And what do I mean by that? What typically was a 9 to 5 workday, it quickly became 8 to 6. One of the things where everybody is working remotely, there's no commute time. And so you don't have to worry about people commuting in on public transportation or something, or being stuck in traffic, getting into the office and, starting meetings at 9 to allow everyone to come in. There was no commute, everybody was home. And so meetings started earlier and earlier. And then you also went later and later in the day. And because we had so many meetings, the days often got longer because even though your meetings ended at 6, you still had work to do. And so it became a stress point for the team. Lunch, we would eat during meetings. You'd find whatever time you could to take a quick break, go to grab something from the kitchen and eat while you were in meetings. And so the work culture got much more intense, and we saw that with our staff. people were working more hours and days. What ended up happening was Sundays became a very big work day for a lot of people, and you would find so many people working on Sundays, just getting through the stuff they couldn't complete from the prior week to help them get ready for the week moving in. And so these were some of the challenges that we've seen move longer. And we've actually, to combat this, started saying no meetings before 8. If you get scheduled a meeting before 8, decline it. And we're really pushing back on meetings after that end after 5 o'clock. We also carved out lunch. So we started blocking the noon time period for people so that they could at least get a break and get some lunch. It still hasn't reduced the people working more hours and more days, because that it's kind of snow plowing the work. So we do have to rethink how that's going, that the longer impact of working more hours and working on weekends. But that is a byproduct of moving to a remote work. Some of our employees, they struggled in isolation. As I mentioned before, California was extremely locked down and very restrictive. We had a lot of, especially younger people who had didn't have family in the area. Some of them were, foreigners who were educated here and took jobs here. They oftentimes lived alone in apartments, and because of the lockdowns, they couldn't see anybody, they couldn't get together with anyone. And so we had a lot of employees struggle with that isolation factor, and not having that human contact. And so we need to provide some increased employee support services. And that was one of the things in response to the pandemic that we had to provide. It was not something that we had initially planned for until through the one-on-one meetings we were having, we started realizing just the volume of employees that were struggling with this. We had that very centralized management structure. Everyone being in the office, seeing your employees, keeping tabs on them. We struggled a little bit with, adapting to a decentralized workforce. The management style had to adapt as well, and some managers did it easier than others. And so, as I mentioned before, there was this whole notion of, well, if you're just working from home, you're really on vacation because I can't monitor what you're doing. And so it was kind of unfair to the employee. We had to learn to trust our employees more. And that's where, when we started looking at the value they were delivering, it helped us understand whether or not they were being productive. And then, especially with, parents, especially single parents, they struggle with the work and homeschooling of children. That was a real struggle for a lot of people. Even though kids were doing school online, it still required a lot of involvement from the parents. And so parents who worked and also had kids remotely, they struggled. Our employee recruitment and onboarding also needed to change. The traditional model of bringing people in to actually interview face-to-face and doing a series of interviews in an office, that whole environment changed. And so going to remote interviewing, remote face-to-face interviews was unique. We also couldn't go to, so many of the events that we would go to recruit. Those events were now virtual or not happening at all. And so we had to find different ways of reaching out and attracting talent. And then we talked on, Laz, from your questions earlier about how COVID-19, impacted business and our customers, and it forced us to really do that reprioritization of work, projects and work that we thought we were going to be doing in 2020. Some got pushed out because we had new things that we had to prioritize based off of our response to the COVID-19 impact. And it was because of how we were working in terms of being agile. Shifting that work was not as hard as I think we thought it would have been. But the ability to reprioritize actually was a lot smoother than anticipated. But it increased the context switching on the teams. So we had a lot of teams that were working on something. They had to stop, shift to something new before picking up what they were working on. And so there was a lot of, we did see a little bit of a dip as we as we were shifting our priorities. And then some departments increased in productivity. So certainly like our IT and finance teams increased in productivity, but others decreased. We had a much lower amount of claims coming in. And so you would think that with that additional time of not having to adjudicate and manage claims, that internal processing could be focused on. I think the fact that our claims teams were not as busy, that kind of bled over into some of the slowness and doing some of their work. And so that was, you know, one of the interesting things that we saw. In fairness, we didn't downsize our workforce at all. We kept everybody fully employed throughout it. So even though we were seeing decreases in claims, and we did not need to really have the number of claims handlers on staff to handle the claims that were coming in, because we had now had, you know, excess capacity to manage claims. Unlike some of our other, you know, companies in the industries that, you know, reduce their workforces, we did not reduce anybody. We did not have any mass layoffs because of COVID. We did see people attrit, and that was just normal attrition that we would normally have, but we didn't do any mass layoffs. So in some areas where we were very busy, you know, IT, finance, you know, you saw the productivity stay high, but in areas where they had that additional capacity, you actually saw the productivity decrease a little bit as they struggled trying to find additional areas of work for them.
So on that front, right? So you said that there were kind of like two issues. So the first one with the meetings. So like we need to block the times when meetings are not happening, and also the reluctance of managers to actually approach it. And again, this working from home equals vacation. So what is sort of your experience from it? What are some of the techniques that you saw to actually convince people that this is the right way of going forward, and people is actually doing the right job? And how do you sort of convince the people who are not convinced that it's still good and still okay and should not create additional pressure on it?
So I think what's really helped mostly is the metrics, right? You know, our at least in our company, our managers love seeing metrics. They love seeing numbers, something they can actually print out and look at and take notes on. When you show the metrics and you show the value and you show the you know, what we are delivering, not just in terms of the outputs, but also when you start measuring value based on the outcome, you can see where we're being very productive. And so in some areas, you know, as I mentioned, you know, from an IT standpoint, we're trying to figure out, do we all have to go into the office, if at all, when we come back? And I get into this in the next slide a little bit. But you know, what we're finding, especially as we're going through the recruiting process, people want to work remotely, and especially in IT. If you write good software, it doesn't matter whether you're sitting in the office or you're sitting, you know, at your home in Montana now. You can write good code from anywhere. And so the physical location aspects, you know, certainly we are seeing, and the metrics are proving out that as we start going back into the office, IT probably doesn't need to come back. But then when you take a look at like our call centers and some of our teams that probably do, and you look at our claims metrics, there's a lot of value that the claims teams have by being co-located. The ability to just, you know, stand up and find a manager, talk about something, having those daily huddles. What we're finding is that, you know, at our call centers, our claims adjudication teams, it's a little bit better for them to be co-located, because there's more value that they're able to provide in a co-located environment. So those will probably be some of the first teams that we look to bring back in, because their numbers have not been as strong as some other areas. And so we're really taking a look at the metrics and the numbers that we're able to derive, and being able to objectively measure is important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So does that answer that question for you?
Yeah,
Vlad?
and then in terms of the meetings, did actually people like handle that? Because one of the biggest issues that people felt, right, is that economy is tanking. There is not enough jobs, and people are feel almost obliged to work more. And then were you able to battle it, or you just kind of wind it down by itself? So how was that?
We're still struggling with it a little bit, right? So as I mentioned, I've instructed all of my teams, and this, a lot of the times the reason the meetings are going earlier and earlier is that we've got teams in multiple time zones, and so to accommodate different time zones, people will start working earlier or they'll stay later. What we're trying to really do is prevent that, and so any meeting that starts before 8, we're asking people don't accept unless it's a rare occasion and you're doing it for a specific reason, and really try to end your day at 5. That has helped. Adding lunch back in was a big help for some people because they needed that break. They needed to just unplug for a bit, go eat lunch, collect their thoughts, go for a walk, and then come back and finish their day. And so some of those things were easy, but the challenging part still becomes is that we have a lot of work on our plate. Even though we did not reduce our workforce because of COVID, we did put a freeze on any net new hiring. So if a person attrits, I'm able to backfill them. But for a number of open positions that we had going into this, they've been frozen for over a year. So the work didn't change. If anything, the work increased, especially in response to COVID. But the number of employees we thought we were going to have, it did not increase as we thought because we did freeze new hiring. And so we're still struggling with this a little bit. And I think until we're able to bring on some of the additional staff in areas that we need, especially in IT, we will be struggling with this for a while. And so I think it's certainly in the IT world, we're not seeing any loss in terms of jobs. IT hiring is extremely strong here in the U.S. I'm not sure globally, but in the U.S., because so many companies have gone remotely, they've been making a much bigger investment in their technology, and so it's made IT people even more of a premium. And so what we're seeing is wages for IT increase, but in some areas where it's easy to find workers, wages are stagnating or being reduced. Because we didn't furlough or lay anyone off, nobody's worried about that right now in our organization. But what I have heard in the industry is that there's a lot of people that are concerned about, especially if the pandemic continues going further, it's going to impact, their ability to work, and is their job going to be eliminated?
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. You need just 1 second here. So one of the things that, I talked about it before, and I'll touch on it here, the change in leadership became crucial, right? So we were a very heavy management cultured organization. And, management is certainly something that's needed, but leadership is different than management. Leadership is critical because leadership, that's where you really set your vision, you set your, you define that mission, and then you help define a clear strategy on getting there. And what we found through the COVID-19 pandemic, especially as we were moving more remotely, the individual employees wanted to understand the work that we are doing. How does it relate to the business? How is what I'm doing helping the business out? And so making sure that you could have that vision and define the mission. That leadership part was a struggle sometimes for some of our senior managers. And so, we're still learning that. Leadership is something that it's difficult to teach. Teaching management is easy. Teaching how to become a good, effective leader sometimes is a little bit harder. You need both, but invest in that leadership capability. because that was critical. And what we found is the managers who were able to be leaders were much more effective than managers being managers. And then I talked about the internet bandwidth being saturated. So in 12 months, where are we? We're still 100% remote workforce. We've have not moved back into any of our offices yet. We do have some critical staff on site. We still have, printing to be done and mailed out. So we do need some staff on site for that. But other than that, every other task has been moved to remote. So what we're finding is that employees are choosing other places to live. We are in San Francisco, which in the United States, if you're not aware, San Francisco at the top of the Bay Area is the most expensive city to live in the US. San Jose, which is at the bottom of the Bay Area, is the second most expensive city to live in, and everything around us is extremely expensive. So what people have decided is we're going to move to other parts of the country, other parts of the state, because I can work from anywhere. I don't have to be close to the city and pay astronomical rent or housing prices. And so people are choosing to move other places. We increased our offshore capacity. Going offshore was something that was a struggle to get to, but once we started proving the model and we started seeing how the productivity and the value and the type of code that the software engineers we were hiring in India was just as good, if not better, than our own onshore software engineers were doing, we were able to start increasing the offshore capacity. And we were able to lock in very good 3-year rates with our offshore partners, and really provide additional value to the organization by reducing overall cost, but also increasing the capability and capacity, because the number of people we could hire offshore is quite significant. So we just signed that as of March 1st, and really the impetus of this one was because we could not hire people onshore and hiring was frozen. We were able to come up with a model where by converting some of the people onshore that were onshore contractors to replace people that were attriting, we were then able to hire offshore people at a rate of 4 to 1. And so for every person that we had attrit onshore that we converted an onshore contractor, we were able to add 4 contractors offshore. So some of that capacity that we were talking about in the previous slide as a challenge, we solved by going offshore to reduce the cost, but increase the capability and capacity of our team. We're at a near unified collaboration platform. So as I mentioned, we're all on Microsoft Teams, but we still use a Cisco phone system. We're in the process of looking at using a virtual voice system so that Microsoft Teams becomes our phone. And so all the communication we can do through it. And what's great about that is that it works on company devices, it works on mobile devices, it works on personal machines. You're able to connect to the Office 365 environment from anywhere. So the effects of this is that our employee collaboration has improved significantly. The communication between employees, the dedicated teams that we've set up to allow for the collaboration between the IT and business has been really good. People love it. The feedback we've been getting from some of those employee satisfaction surveys has been very, very high. As I mentioned, we're doing more bring your own device capability, so it's giving the flexibility to the teams to use the devices they need, but it's reducing our ability that we have to ship out a laptop to every single person. So now that we're remote, physical devices aren't necessarily required. As long as you have a machine that's powerful enough to do your job, we can provide you the tools that you need to be successful in a virtual capacity. Then now we're rethinking our working from home policies to be more flexible and attract top talent. People who are going to be high in demand, they're looking for 100% working remote. And that's one of the biggest things that we're seeing and increasing in terms of our talent acquisition processes. Everybody wants to not be in an office. They want to work remotely from wherever it is they are. And so we're rethinking those working from home policies to kind of adapt to how employees want to work. If more companies are going to allow them to be remote, we're going to struggle in the hiring process because we won't be able to provide that. So we're rethinking that. It's also, because of this, it's putting us in a position to reduce our leased workspaces, right? And so, one of the things we're taking a look at is, how does our footprint within the workspace need to change to accommodate employees coming back and allow for social distancing within the office? But then, do we need all of the office space that we're currently renting? Rent in San Francisco is astronomical. So if we're able to not renew some of our space and collapse our space, or maybe reduce some office locations or offices, like some of our smaller satellite offices, we'll save money by reducing our leased workspace, by allowing our employees to work from home more. The increased customer focus with agile delivery, and this looks like it got messed up. And the employee satisfaction was increasing. The more requests to move and be 100% remote has really helped and increase the employee satisfaction. They're enjoying working from home and the freedom and flexibility it gives to them. And so the employee satisfaction is going up, even though we are working more. It's kind of interesting when you see those numbers. And then our increased customer focus with a more agile delivery. So, as I was saying to you before, Blas, meeting our customers where they're at, what we're finding is more and more people now through COVID, they're all going online. People that weren't online before, they're adopting to online technologies. And so we're really moving to a much more virtual environment in the engagement of our customers. And so our capabilities and our products, we're making a heavy investment into the Azure cloud and moving more of our customer portals into a cloud-enabled environment, of which will then allow us to be able to deploy faster and quicker than we can today on premise. And so that is accelerating now. We've got a partner with EY that's helping us get there. But then, as we talked, it's that flexible insurance policies and allowing the customers to update and change their payroll information on a monthly basis, and then providing them incremental value. It's getting to that product lifecycle versus a project lifecycle, and then the solid metrics to track productivity based off business and customer outcomes and not hours worked. We were so heavy on, are you in the office? Did you work your 9 to 5? Now we're taking a look at, are we achieving the outcomes we want, and measuring how we're delivering value to our customers. So it's been quite a journey over the last 12 months. We certainly have more of a journey to go to, but the engagement that we've done, both from an agile delivery process and an agile mindset, shifting to products versus projects, and really taking a look at leadership versus management in terms of setting that vision and direction for the organization, and tying the work back that our employees are doing to business and customer value-driven metrics has been critical. So these are the 4 slides that I had prepared. Here's my contact information. Thank you. But Blas, I think certainly any questions that come up or that people have, I'm more than happy to answer and entertain any of them.
Hi, yeah, we actually have a few questions from the audience. So let me go from the beginning. The first question here is from Gerardo, and he's asking, what are the dimensions of the structure that you had to digitalize during the COVID emergency? And in terms of number of employees, customers, and other written premium?
So our employee base is about 1,000 people. We've got our total net written premium, we're about $1 billion in net written premium. That's down this year. just because of COVID. Our number of policies roughly stayed the same. I want to say we're in about the 10,000 range, if my memory is correct. And so that's the size of scale. The first part of that question was what was the first that was asked, Gerardo?
Yeah, the first part of the question were what are the dimensions of the structure that you had to digitalize during the
Okay.
COVID, and in terms of number of employees, customers, and the unwritten premium.
Okay, so I think in terms of the dimensions, I think I answered that, but if there's other aspects to dimension, let me know and I can certainly elaborate more in terms of the size and scale of what it is we were trying to do and manage.
Maybe a more focused detail on, for example, let's take a dive towards the onboarding process during COVID. What did you find were the most difficulties that you had during this onboarding process?
Some of the difficulties that we had, we still provide every single employee a company-owned laptop. What we found just in terms of delays and capturing their address, their physical address, when their start date is, we've had delays in shipping equipment out. That was more early on. We've gotten much better at it now, so we don't have those delays anymore. We struggled initially with, how do we onboard someone who's 100% remote, right? Normally we would have a process where we would pair that person up and, they would sit with different team members and, they would sit with HR and talk with HR. Having to schedule virtual meetings for everything and make sure you had all the sequence down, that was certainly a learning curve that we had to go through. But just in the whole, what we are finding, especially from a technology standpoint, what we are willing to pay and what the market is offering, we've had to adjust a number of times. And so we're starting, one of the challenges internal that we're looking at is we're starting to hire people a year later at a much higher rate than we were a year ago. And so it's starting to set some salaries off kilter. And so we need to probably, level set and take a look at that as we move forward, in terms of, what does normalization look like post-COVID and how we want to adjust for that. But the fact that, we would get a lot of candidates going to recruiting events, and those in-person events were very good. One of the things, especially that we see within the technology industry, is recruiting women software engineers is sometimes difficult to do. It's not. The culture has not been very inviting to them and encouraging them to take part in software engineering, and it's been very male dominated for a long time. Likewise, when I got here at this company, I had no technical women. I had women on staff, but they were in non-technical IT roles. We made a significant investment in going to things like Women in Technology, Women Hack, and other women events, specifically to target female software engineers and increase that population. We were at one point hiring out of those, every event 2 to 3 women. They were very, very fruitful. And what we've found since then is that the virtual events just do not have the impact that the in-person events really did. And so, our ability to find and hire women has actually reduced since COVID. And so that is one thing that, for us, diversity and inclusion is very important. And while in most cases we're very diverse as a workforce in IT, that there was a underrepresentation of women that we have corrected, but we're finding it harder to do so. So that is certainly one area that has changed for us, is those in-person to virtual meetings are not having the same impact as virtual meetings did.
Thank you so much. The next question is about the WFH model. Do you encourage this model, and are you worried about losing innovation, a capability? This question is based off the fact that the participants saw a number of articles talking about the difficulty of being innovative while working remotely.
Yeah, so one of the things, and that's an excellent question. We are, and actually, we have one today. I'm going to go right from here. We host a hackathon 4 times a year, right? And so we want our employees to be creative. We want them to be innovative. We want them to be thinking outside the box. They partner with our business, so there's a lot of times they hear things that the business needs that they may not have time to either work on, or it's not a major priority for the business, so it's not something that gets addressed in our backlog. But the teams will, in one day come up with a solution that they'll put together. And we've had some really creative solutions that we've added into providing more value to our business. One of the initial ones was how we create APIs for data. And we created an API generator internally to create, data, APIs for various data points, and that's been adopted into all of our applications. And so we've done a number of different things to increase the value and reduce the cycle time to start and deliver on some of the value we're creating. And so the innovation factor, we definitely want to keep it up. And what we found is, because we do this, quarterly, innovation is still occurring. Where we have probably reduced is, extreme programming has probably suffered. Before, where it was very easy to sit 2 software engineers side by side and have them work collaboratively on a single piece of code, the working remotely has not fostered that as much as you would like. And so that's one area that I am a little bit concerned about, is the ability to do some extreme programming. But as we mature in our working from home processing, I think that's going to change. We have some people and some teams that are still trying to use it and adopt it, and we're learning from that, and we're taking those learnings and sharing them with additional teams. As for work from home, I think it really depends upon the culture of the company, who you are, how you want to operate. And I think some areas are more predisposed to working from home. I think certainly from a technology standpoint, your IT teams and technical teams are much more predisposed and amenable to working in that manner. But as we found in some of our other teams, that in-person collaboration and being together, especially in some of our claims areas and call centers, it may make sense to have them co-located, but we'll certainly see. We are not going to be a company that's going to go 100% remote, though. We will still have physical locations. We'll still have offices to go into. Whether people are doing it every single day will really remain to be seen. But certainly with social distancing and asking people to go in and be on public transportation, I can't imagine that it's going to go back full time anytime soon. So working from home and the ability to work from home is going to be, here for some time, at least in California.
On that note, speaking about working from home, what's one of your most pleasant experiences working from home, and what is your unpleasant?
Well, I think one of the most pleasant experiences that I have is I started hosting. It's a Friday at 4 happy hour / ask me anything meeting, and it was a time for us. It's Friday, 4:00. Put your laptops away, stop working. Let's go grab a drink, and we'll virtually have a happy hour. And it really, when we first started out, that was a huge help for the teams in disseminating information. A lot of team members had the same questions, and so it was good to have that conversational back and forth and get to see everyone. And as people got more comfortable with the working from home and knowing that this was going to be a much longer indefinite period of time, those Ask Me Anything sessions got into just, talking about out of work things, sharing, stories, on what people are doing, what they did on the weekend. And it was a good way for us to just connect. And, it was only an hour, and so it didn't take a lot out of the workday, but it was a good way for us just to, as a full team, get to see each other and virtually, give a toast to the end of the week. So that certainly has been one of the most important things. I think one of the hardest things has been some of our employees have really struggled. I mentioned before about people struggling with the isolation and being alone, and there was a lot of mental health concerns that we had. And so I think from my standpoint, the empathy and the human aspect of knowing that you've got team members on your team that I'm not effectively trained to address their concerns, finding ways to make sure that they had the help and support that they needed, through licensed and trained professionals, was important. But it was, it hurt me as an individual to know that I had employees that were suffering that I couldn't do anything about. As a senior leader, I take their burdens on as my own, and I like to think of myself as a coach, right? A servant leader. I want to solve the problems for my employees. There were just some problems I could not solve, and that was the uniqueness of the COVID situation. But we were able to find ways to help those employees who were struggling, and help them get through some of the personal things that they were dealing with in the isolation. So that was probably the hardest struggle for me personally, was understanding that.
Thank you so much. We have another question here, going in a different direction. How did you address employee promotions given the lack of interpersonal relationship with managers?
Surprisingly, that was not as hard as you think it might have been, right? It was important for us to do the weekly one-on-ones, and so what we tried to instill was a standard calendar. So every Thursday was our one-on-one days, and so I met with each of my staff on Thursdays. I reserved some time for some skip level meetings. I also had, my peer level one-on-ones earlier in the week, and so I would have things to talk about and share with my individual leaders on my staff. And because of the one-on-ones they were having with their employees, performance was, we had a pretty good handle on performance of how people were doing. And when it came, this year for performance, we typically do promotions at performance reviews, and so the first round every year is at the performance reviews in March. And we actually got together as a leadership team, and I pulled out all the leaders, but we looked at each of our employees. We looked at how individual managers rated, because on any staff, you've got your manager who's always hard and your manager who's always easy, and then everybody in between. And so we wanted to make sure it was fair for all of the employees, is that we discussed performance, and people would get adjusted based off of what their manager's initial performance thought was, based off of feedback from others who interacted with that person or worked with that person. And so, we would calibrate to make sure that, all the employees were being rated rather fairly. And so it was important for us to do that calibration. But then, you take a look at your top talent, and you take a look at people who've been performing for really well for a period of time, especially those that when you take a look at their current job description, and then you take a look at the work they're doing, and if you can see that they're doing that work in the next level up, that person was ready for a promotion. And all the people that we put up for promotion in March were I wouldn't say rubber stamped, but it was all like, yeah, that makes sense because we've talked about that person, we've had conversations. Yep, I can totally understand that, And so the promotion process actually worked relatively easy. And then we also identified a number of people throughout this that, hey, this person's been rated pretty high. They're probably, ready for a promotion based off of their last couple of years. So, let's get them ready so that come halfway through the year, typically, in the September timeframe when we do our next round of promotions, we're able to get that individual or those individuals promoted at that time. And so employee development, employee performance is something that we do on a continual basis. But there are those periods in the year where we do formalize promotions that, because of the conversations we've had throughout the year, it really becomes a very easy thing to justify.
Thank you so much. That's a great way to end. I think. Does participants do you have any other questions last minute before we let Mr. Thomas go? I know we asked you a lot of questions. Thank you so much for being able to.
No, this is great. I love the questions. I really appreciate it, and I hope that everyone found this valuable and helpful. And certainly, please reach out to me if you've got other questions. But it was good to present and talk with you today. So
thank you so much. Yeah, the participants, if you take full advantage of Mr. Thomas, he has all his contact info on here: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can go ahead and reach out if you have any other further questions. If not, thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. We're going to give the participants a 5-minute break. And we will come back again in 5 minutes for our second presentation. Thank you again, Mr. Thomas. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You as well. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you a lot. Thanks, bye.
All right, everyone, participants, we have a 5-minute